Communication development in children with autism, of course, is quite varied. We know that there is a huge range of communication ability in children with autism, but typically they'll display less attention than their typically developing peers to emotional displays of distress or discomfort. They display less shared positive affect, and less emotional reciprocity is noticed following praise. Children with ASD also show very restricted function, a range of restricted functions. And what that means is under our pragmatics, we use our communication to do many different things, to request, to protest, to share information, to repair what we've said, to clarify what we've said, to greet. All of these different things are what we use. Children with ASD typically kind of stick in the requesting and protesting functions, and those are certainly what you see first. Later, you may see some seeking comfort, initiating social games, and praising, but those things tend to be restricted or later developing. Commenting also and sharing enjoyment, interests, things like that may also be later or even absent. Some individuals with ASD may demonstrate an ability to identify facial expressions. In fact, I think that most kids with ASD can identify emotions on facial expression as a vocabulary item. When they're fixed in place, when you just show them a picture, they can say, oh, that's happy, that's sad, that's embarrassed. But they have difficulty when they are in a natural social interaction of figuring out how does that go with what someone said and the situation. All that takes a great deal of functional connectivity in the brain, and that's where they have a great deal of difficulty. My friends who are adults with ASD will sometimes comment, you know, I'm watching you and I'm listening to your words, and I can really kind of only do one or the other. So if I just listen to your words, by the time you're finished, then I have to go back and try and gather the development or the information that your body has shown me, and then it's too late because you've already moved on. So they're really kind of caught in trying to integrate information from affect, from body language, from the situation, and from the language. Let's specifically look at communication that's typically associated with Asperger's Syndrome, because these children really show a very specific kind of communication pattern that is sometimes not seen as a communication disorder, but in fact it really is. They have a very pedantic vocabulary. They're kind of the little professor. People go, oh my goodness, did you hear what he said? Look at the vocabulary that he uses, etc. But they'll have a great deal of difficulty with what I was just talking about, that interpretation of paralinguistic features. They may have poor eye contact, social referencing issues, they may lack inflection, or may have abnormal inflection, you know, that is kind of a conglomeration of all the people they've known and memorized in their life. Their non-literal communication is very challenging, so in other words, they have a lot of trouble usually with figurative language or idiomatic language. And conversational skills are always diminished. Things such as topic management, shifting topics, switching styles according to the context. You don't talk the same in church as you talk at home or with friends on the playground. They tend to dominate every conversation and often interrupt in the classroom. Talk about beginning communicators. So remember, when we're talking about beginning communicators, our focus is on joint attention, doing things that really connects throughout their day, and certainly to give them symbolization during that. So what we're going to talk about today is basically those things that give us a way to establish some joint attention with symbolization. And of course, like everything else, I think visuals are key in this. We've already talked about concrete calendar systems or ways to make a daily activity schedule using objects. I do that right off the bat. Figure out remember we talked about how to do this. You figure out what their schedule is like. We figure out what objects represent those things in the schedule and really pair objects with what they do or early photographs with what they do throughout their day. We're going to talk about picture exchange communication system. Certainly you can use communication books, environmental choice boards, and talking switches for songs, transitions, turn taking, and greeting. For those of you using this course as part of your autism endorsement, we will go into much more depth in your assistive technology course or your augmentative and alternative communication course about these things. So, augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, is very controversial in children with autism. Some people actually believe that if you use sign language or picture exchange communication system with them, with the children, that will inhibit the development of speech and language, when in fact research evidence shows just the opposite. It actually supports speech and language development. There's not one peer-reviewed study that shows that the use of AAC inhibits speech. And doesn't that make sense? Because remember we talked about the fact that really we need that communicative act, that person-to-person connection. And if they're learning that person-to-person connection, what their form is, or actually how they take their message and give it to others, is not as important as that underlying foundation. Once you have that, then you have a willing communicator that will gladly work on their speech. Although I don't ever do it as an all or nothing. I certainly work on all of it at the same time. The other thing is it's virtually impossible to predict who's going to develop speech and who will not develop speech. So to say, oh, this child probably won't develop speech, we'll use AAC with them, and this child might develop speech, so we'll wait, we're losing valuable early intervention time. Children who are not able to communicate in some way are at strong risk for cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral problems. The connection between communication and behavior, we've already talked about, is very, very strong, but so is the connection between cognitive, social, and emotional growth. Speech therapy fits beautifully in with AAC methods. I typically plan for communication for today, what can I get them quickly to be able to communicate, and communication for tomorrow. So I don't just put all my eggs in one basket ever.